change the first time? Mask, the awkward gear. But when you enter the water, everything changes. Inhale. The air comes with a reassuring rush. You're light, agile, free, like you've never experienced before. With your first dive, a door opens to a different world. Go through it, and your life will never be the same.
Fly through the water, under the sea. Fly through the water, under the sea.
If you love nature, you can see more wildlife in 10 minutes on a coral reef than in 10 hours in a forest. If discovery drives you, underwater you'll see things most people never see and go places most people never go. And beyond this, diving and divers are just plain fun. You'll meet all sorts of people in diving and make many new friends. Divers come from all ages and cultures, but share a common bond, a passion for underwater exploration.
Hi, good to meet you.
It's cliché but true that we know more about the moon's surface than the ocean floor. Even after hundreds of dives, there's always something new to discover and thrill you. In the PADI Open Water Diver course, you'll learn to explore the underwater world using scuba equipment, and you'll find the course a fun and rewarding challenge. To become a scuba diver, you need to be comfortable in water and have basic swimming skills. And you need to be in good overall health, particularly your circulatory and respiratory systems. You also need good judgment and be ready to follow the guidelines and principles required for safe diving. Diving's a kick, but like anything with some risk, you can't act like these don't matter. You need to have your act together. PADI, the Professional Association of Diving Instructors, developed the PADI Open Water Diver course based on state-of-the-art instructional systems, education theory, and practice. As the world's largest diver training organization, more people learn to dive in PADI programs than in all others combined. So you can be confident that dive professionals will recognize your credentials no matter where diving takes you. The PADI Open Water Diver course consists of confined water dives, knowledge development, and open water dives. Learning begins with confined water dives, where you learn and apply basic scuba skills in a pool or pool-like environment. It's a course, but this is really a lot of fun. Knowledge development establishes the principles and basic information you need to have fun, diving safely. You'll complete this primarily on your own time, with some short review and quiz sessions with your instructor. The open water dives complete your training as a certified entry-level diver by allowing you to apply and further develop your dive skills in a dive environment under instructor supervision. The confined water dives are pretty cool, but you're gonna love this. If you've never used scuba before, get ready. This is what you've been looking for. Immediately you experience new sensations, like breathing underwater. You'll venture into a realm where everything looks, sounds, and feels a bit different. In Section 1, we look at some of the principles you need to know about the underwater world and some of the dive equipment and scuba systems you'll be using. We'll also go over the buddy system and the skills in your first confined water dive. Let's start with a look at buoyancy. Have you ever wondered why a large steel ocean liner floats, but a small coin sinks? The reason is that water buoys up an object with a force equal to the weight of the water the object displaces. So if an object weighs less than the water it displaces, it floats. We call that positively buoyant. If it weighs more than the water it displaces, it sinks. We call that negatively buoyant. If it weighs the same as the water it displaces, it neither floats nor sinks. We call that neutrally buoyant. You'll learn to control your buoyancy using your BCD, buoyancy control device, and weight system, so you hover neutrally buoyant, almost like a weightless astronaut. Or float positively buoyant at the surface, so you can save energy and rest. Although you don't usually notice, air constantly exerts pressure on you. If you've ever walked against a strong wind, though, you've felt its force, demonstrating that air exerts pressure. Air pressure is simply the air's weight caused by gravity holding the atmosphere against the Earth. At sea level, we call this pressure 1 atmosphere, or bar. Water also has weight and exerts pressure. 10 meters, 33 feet of seawater exerts the same pressure as the atmosphere of air. So at 10 meters, 33 feet, the pressure is 2 atmospheres, or bar, 1 of air and 1 of water. At 20 meters, 66 feet, the pressure is 3 atmospheres, or bar. At 30 meters, 99 feet, it's 4, and so on. You don't feel pressure through most of your body because it is made primarily of water, which is incompressible. But air is compressible, and you will feel pressure changes underwater in body air spaces, much like you feel pressure changes in your ears and sinuses in an airplane. Let's look at how changing pressure affects an air volume. If you descend with a flexible or inverted container, air compresses and the volume compresses proportionately to the pressure. For example, with the pressure 2 atmospheres or bar at 10 meters 33 feet, the gas volume is half what it was at the surface. At 3 atmospheres 20 meters 66 feet, it's 1/3, and so on. Notice that all the air is still there. It's just compressed into a smaller area. Air density follows the pressure proportionately, too. To maintain the same volume as you descend, you have to add air to keep up with the volume reduction. This is the principle behind equalization, which we'll talk about in a moment. Obviously, it works the other way, too. Air expands as you ascend, and the pressure diminishes. If you halve the pressure, for example, by ascending from 10 meters 33 feet to the surface, an air volume will double. So if you equalize the volume by adding air during descent, you must release some of the expanding air during ascent to maintain the same volume. Air in a sealed container, such as a bag or balloon, will expand the bag or balloon, even bursting if it cannot stretch enough to accommodate the excess air. This is a very important concept we'll return to in a moment. Now, let's see how the pressure-volume-density relationships you just learned apply to body air spaces, particularly your ears, sinuses, and dive mask. During descent, pressure pushes tissue into these spaces as the air compresses. You feel this as discomfort, and with continued descent, even pain and injury. This is called a squeeze. To prevent a squeeze, you add air to air spaces as you descend. This is called equalization. You equalize your ears and sinuses by blowing gently against your blocked nostrils. You can also wiggle your jaw side to side or swallow. Equalize frequently as you descend before you feel discomfort. The idea is to be proactive. When you equalize often enough, you don't feel discomfort. If you can't equalize, ascend a short distance and try again. If you still can't equalize, discontinue the dive. Never attempt a forceful or extended equalization. Doing so can cause serious ear injuries. Congestion due to a cold or allergy can plug air passages, making equalization difficult or impossible. So never dive with a cold or allergy, even if you use medications that clear your air passages. Medications may wear off during the dive, creating equalization problems as you ascend, and they may have other undesirable effects, such as drowsiness. You equalize your mask simply by exhaling into it through your nose. If you forget, you'll feel a mask squeeze, which feels a bit like the masks sucking your face in. You'll probably find that mask equalization becomes something you do automatically. Decreasing pressure has some concerns you need to be aware of too, especially regarding your lungs. When you ascend and descend holding your breath without scuba, pressure changes have little effect. Air in your lungs compresses as you descend and re-expands to about its original volume when you surface. But when you're scuba diving, it's another story. Scuba allows you to breathe underwater by delivering air at the surrounding pressure. This means your lungs reach their normal volume as you breathe at depth. And as long as you breathe normally, keeping the airway to your lungs open, no problem. But if you were to hold your breath and descend, the air trapped in your lungs would overexpand them, much like the sealed bag or balloon filled at depth and taken to the surface. Expanding air can cause lung overexpansion, lung rupture, the most serious injury that can happen to a diver. For this reason, the most important rule in scuba diving is to breathe continuously and never, never hold your breath. Even slight pressure changes, as little as a meter 3 feet, can cause lung overexpansion. Lung overexpansion can force air into the bloodstream and chest cavity, causing severe injuries including paralysis and death. But while these are very severe injuries, they're also very easy to avoid. Simply breathe at all times and don't hold your breath while scuba diving. As long as you breathe normally, you continually equalize your lungs with the surrounding pressure and avoid lung overexpansion. It's important to overcome any natural tendency to hold your breath, even in shallow water, and breathe continuously. When you practice some skills that require you to take your regulator out of your mouth, you'll exhale a slow, steady bubble stream so that even then, you never hold your breath. Your other body air spaces generally pose no difficulty when you ascend because expanding air releases from them quite easily. But once in a while, a diver experiences a reverse block. This happens in the ears and sinuses when congestion keeps expanding air from escaping during ascent. Reverse blocks are rare and generally result from diving with a cold or allergy medication that wears off underwater. So don't dive with a cold or congestion. If you feel discomfort caused by a reverse block, stop or slow your ascent and descend a meter, few feet if necessary. Give the trapped air time to work its way out and ascend more slowly. As you just learned, when air compresses under pressure, it becomes more dense. For example, At 20 meters, 66 feet, the pressure is 3 atmospheres, or bar, so a given air volume has 3 times as many air molecules as the same volume would at the surface. Scuba gear supplies air to you at the surrounding pressure. So at 20 meters, 66 feet, you use your air 3 times faster than you do at the surface. All other factors being equal, the deeper you dive, the faster you use your air. Breathe slowly and deeply while scuba diving. Save energy and don't overexert yourself. It's modern dive gear that adapts you for the underwater world. This is why understanding and owning scuba gear is part of the fun of diving. Your PADI instructor will help you select and fit equipment you'll use in this course and invest in for your underwater adventures. You undoubtedly realize you need a mask to see clearly underwater because your eyes can't focus in water. You can choose from a lot of different scuba masks, but don't skimp. Invest in one that fits comfortably and properly. A mask that hurts and leaks sucks the fun right out of a dive. To check the fit, place the mask gently against your face and inhale through your nose. It should stay on by suction without having to press or twist the mask.
Works really well.
Awesome.
If you'll need a prescription mask, be sure to tell your PADI professional. Many masks accommodate prescriptions, but not all. When you get your new mask home, gently scour the inside of the glass with a non-gel toothpaste or another low abrasion cleaner to remove chemical coating left from manufacturing. If you don't, you won't be able to defog it for diving. With that tank on your back, you might wonder why a snorkel is standard scuba equipment. First, it lets you swim or rest at the surface with your face in the water without wasting your tank air. Second, if the water's a bit rough, it's usually easier to breathe through a snorkel than your mouth because less water splashes in. A snorkel's basically a tube with a mouthpiece on one end. One suited for scuba will have a large bore so you can breathe easily, be around 43 centimeters, 17 inches long, give or take, and have smooth, rounded bends to minimize breathing resistance. Attach your snorkel on the left side of your mask with the supplied snorkel keeper. Left, because your regulator comes across your right shoulder. Care for your snorkel by rinsing it in fresh water along with your mask. Unless you have size 97 feet, you'll use fins to provide a large surface area that your powerful leg muscles can push against to move you through the water. It may seem like there's an overwhelming array of options: blade size, materials, ridges, vents, and so on. Your PADI professional can help you select the fins best suited to your needs. Full foot fins are convenient and suitable for warm water diving where you don't need additional foot protection. But most scuba divers opt for open heel fins with wetsuit boots that insulate your feet and provide some protection when you're walking to or from the dive site. When sizing your fin, be sure the pocket comes to the point where your ankle meets your foot. If it doesn't, you need a larger size. Basic care for all dive gear calls for rinsing in fresh water after each use, especially in salt water or chlorinated water, keeping it out of direct sunlight, and storing in a cool, dry place. Although scuba's been around for more than 50 years, it was relatively recently that the equipment evolved into the integrated, streamlined unit you have today. Modern scuba consists of 3 basic components that, when assembled, function as a single unit: the BCD, scuba tank, and regulator. As you learned earlier, your BCD, buoyancy control device, permits you to adjust your buoyancy by adding or releasing air. Over the years, there have been various styles, but today by far the most common is the jacket-style BCD, which you wear like a sleeveless coat. Modern BCDs all feature a large diameter inflation-deflation hose for easily adding or releasing air, a low-pressure inflator mechanism for push-button control, and an overpressure relief valve so it won't burst if overinflated.
Okay, cool.
You want to choose one sized for you, adjustable with ample buoyancy for you and your other equipment.
Okay.
Many divers prefer a weight-integrated BCD, which eliminates a separate weight belt. We'll go over weight systems in more detail in Section 2. To use your BCD, you need to adjust it for a proper fit. Check that it's comfortably snug but not too tight. Then fully inflate it to be sure it still doesn't feel restrictive. Your instructor will help you adjust your BCD during your confined water dives. After diving, rinse your BCD with fresh water like other gear. But you also need to rinse the inside. Fill it about a third with fresh water, then the rest of the way with air. Swish the water around and then drain it completely through the deflator hose. After allowing it to dry, partially inflate it for storage. Obviously, your scuba tank holds the compressed air you breathe underwater. It's a high-pressure cylinder made of aluminum or steel, with a valve that controls airflow to and from the tank. You can identify valves as yoke valves or DIN valves. Yoke valves are the most common. The regulator attaches via a yoke assembly. With the DIN system, the regulator screws into the valve. The DIN system handles somewhat higher pressures. All regulator connections with a tank require an O-ring. Without it, there's no airtight seal. Look for the O-ring in the face of yoke valves, or on the regulator if you use the DIN system. Your tank comes pre-assembled, and you only need to have it filled at your local PADI dive center or resort with pure, dry, compressed breathing air. Note that you never fill your cylinder with pure oxygen in recreational diving. Since scuba cylinders hold high-pressure air, you want to handle them carefully. Always block, tie, or strap them so they don't roll or tumble in a car or boat. In places where your cylinder might get knocked over easily, lay it down. Besides rinsing in fresh water and rinsing after each use, you have some extra maintenance considerations with cylinders. The valve should open and close smoothly. If it doesn't, have your dive center or resort service it. Always open and close the valve gently and don't over-tighten it. Never completely drain your cylinder. Always leave at least a few bar, couple hundred psi in it to keep moisture and contaminants from entering. Your scuba regulator allows you to breathe underwater by reducing high-pressure tank air to match the surrounding water pressure and delivering it only when you inhale. Because regulators only release air on demand, in some places divers call them demand valves. Your regulator is a simple and reliable device with only a few moving parts. The first stage attaches to the valve and reduces the cylinder air to an intermediate pressure. The second stage reduces this intermediate pressure to the surrounding pressure so you can breathe comfortably. Your regulator also has a submersible pressure gauge, SPG or contents gauge for short, that tells you how much air you have. It has an extra second stage on a longer hose called an alternate air source, which you'll learn to use for sharing air with another diver. And it has a hose with a coupling to attach to the low-pressure inflator on your BCD. If you're diving in a dry suit, there will be two such hoses, with the longer one going to your dry suit. You'll learn more about alternate air sources and dry suits in Section 2. Your dive center or resort will attach the SPG and other accessories you choose. So aside from assembling your scuba unit, there's nothing you need to do with your regulator prior to diving. After each use, rinse your regulator thoroughly with fresh water. Put the first stage dust cover in place to keep water from entering the first stage. Rinse gently and don't press the purge button, which can allow water to flow up the hose into the first stage. Finally, your regulator needs annual servicing by a qualified professional to keep it properly lubricated and adjusted and to replace worn parts. Take care of it, and it will take care of you. Your SPG tells you how much air you have during a dive so you can avoid running out. Obviously, it's mandatory equipment. SPGs range from simple gauges to electronic gauges that combine with other instruments in a dive computer. We'll cover computers in more detail in the next section. Some SPGs have no hose, but use a transmitter on the first stage to send air supply information to a computer on your wrist. One of the principles of safe recreational diving is that you don't dive alone. Even during your confined water dives, you'll practice diving with a buddy. Buddies lend each other a hand, and they enhance each other's safety by helping check each other's gear before a dive. By reminding each other of air, depth, and time limits underwater. And by being ready to assist in the unlikely event of an emergency.
It's just the way it integrated.
So the buddy system is important for practicality, safety, and fun. You and your buddy have a responsibility to each other. For the system to work, you have to take it seriously. But that doesn't mean you can't have fun at the same time.
Gotcha.
Make a habit of staying close to your buddy at all times. Okay, now let's look at the scuba skills you learn and practice in your first dive in a pool or confined water.
Actual tank. So kind of check, make sure you got the right position there, and then go ahead and cinch up your BCDs.
Start assembling your gear by putting your BCD on your tank. The BCD tank band stretches when wet, so the first step is to wet it. Slide the BCD down on the cylinder so the valve opening faces where your head will be. Set it so the top of the jacket's hard plate, if it has one, is about even with the tank valve base. Next, tighten the cam band as much as you can by hand, then swing it over to lock it down. As a check, lift the unit by the BCD and shake it gently. The regulator goes on next. Check to be sure there's an O-ring in the valve, or on the regulator first stage if you're using a DIN system regulator. Orient the primary second stage to go over your right shoulder. Then remove the dust cap and put the first stage in place. Tighten the yoke only finger tight. Or for the DIN system, gently screw the regulator into the valve until it's snug. Now attach the low-pressure inflator hose to the BCD low-pressure inflator. Face the SPG away from you and open the valve slowly and gently all the way. If you hear a small leak, the valve O-ring may be dirty or worn out, so let your instructor know. Assuming no leaks, check your submersible pressure gauge to see that you have enough air for the dive. Press the purge button momentarily. Air should flow freely and stop when you release it. Exhale into the mouthpiece to check the exhaust valves. Then, take a few breaths. Your regulator should breathe smoothly and easily. Last, secure all hoses with clips, snaps, and other attachments. Dangling SPGs, alternate air sources, and other equipment damage and kill underwater life when they drag across the bottom or reef. And this damages your gear and creates drag when you swim. Nothing dangles or protrudes from the proficient, environmentally sensitive diver. With your scuba unit assembled, it's time to gear up. Have your mask, fins, and snorkel adjusted before the dive to save time. If you'll be using a wetsuit, that goes on first. With most jacket BCDs, you put your weight belt on next. What's important is that nothing traps your weight belt. You need to be able to remove it quickly with one hand in an emergency. Wear it with the standard right hand release. If you're using a weight-integrated BCD, you probably won't use a weight belt at all. To get into your scuba unit, make sure the shoulder straps are connected. Then slip into it like a coat while someone holds it for you. Fasten and adjust the waist and shoulder straps so they're snug but not overly tight. When everything feels right, tilt your head back. If it hits the tank valve, your tank's probably too high. Condensation will fog your mask unless you use commercial defog, or in a pinch, saliva. Rub defog on the inside of the mask, then rinse it once briefly. You should be fog-free for the whole dive, unless you flood your mask. To put on your mask without getting hair trapped under it, put it against your face, then pull the strap back.
Check those straps.
Put your fins on in the water, or as close to it as possible. Avoid walking in fins. If you must, walk backward to avoid tripping. When you're almost ready to go, check your gear and your buddies for proper fit and function. In the next confined water dive, you'll learn a 5-step pre-dive safety check for this. The final step before entering deep water is to partially inflate your BCD. Press the low-pressure inflator button in short bursts until you've inflated it enough so you float comfortably. That's usually around half full. To deflate your BCD so you can go underwater, you want to be vertical, relatively head up, in the water. Hold up the BCD hose and press the exhaust valve button. Many BCDs have quick dump exhaust valves too, which you use by pulling the BCD hose or a lanyard.
Ready to take your first breath? All right.
Ready to breathe underwater for the first time? Great. But just a second, your instructor needs to give you a few hand signals so you can communicate down there.
Ready to give it a try?
Yeah.
Slow her down, put the rag in your mouth, exhale into it first. Just take deep, slow breaths.
All right.
Let's go, all right.
Okay, now. You'll never forget the first time you breathe underwater, and you may not want to trust your regulator at first, but take a few breaths. Hey, it works. As you get used to breathing underwater, remember to breathe continuously and not hold your breath. Watch for your instructor's signals, but relax and enjoy the experience. After you're comfortable breathing underwater, your instructor will have you remove the regulator from your mouth and replace it. You learn to do this because there are skills you'll practice that involve taking out the mouthpiece, and it can happen by accident. No big deal. Out of your mouth, the second stage fills with water that you need to clear before you can breathe again. The easiest way to do this is in a more or less upright position. Exhale sharply into the mouthpiece. This blows the water out of the one-way valves so you can get air. But what if you don't have enough air in your lungs? No worries. Block the mouthpiece with your tongue, and then again in a more or less upright position. Press the purge button. Air from your tank blows the water out, and now you can breathe. Since the rule is you never hold your breath while scuba diving, when the regulator's not in your mouth, exhale a continuous stream of bubbles by making an ah sound. This keeps your airway open to avoid serious, possibly fatal, lung overexpansion injuries. When you let go of the second stage, or if it gets bumped from your mouth, it tends to swing behind your back. There are two ways to find it easily. For the first, get in an upright position, then lean a bit to your right. Run your arms straight back alongside your tank and then sweep forward. The regulator hose will end up against your elbow. This method is easiest and works most of the time, but once in a while your second stage may hang up on something. Reach behind your head with your right hand and find where the hose attaches to the first stage. It may help you reach the first stage if you lift the tank up and to the right with your left hand. Follow the hose until you find the second stage. By this point, you'll probably notice that water tends to seep into your mask. You don't want to have to go to the surface every time this happens, so to blow it out, hold the top of your mask firmly against your face, blow through your nose, and tilt your head back. The air forces the water out of the bottom of the mask. Some masks have a purge valve for clearing water. If yours does, hold your mask firmly and look down while blowing through your nose, making the valve the lowest point. The air forces the water out the valve. Ready to stretch your legs? Point your fins straight behind you and kick from your hip, slowly and steadily, with only a slight knee bend. Keep your fins underwater when swimming at the surface because lifting them out of the water just wastes energy. Of course, the flutter kick isn't the only way to get around underwater. If you have a physical challenge that limits leg use, for instance, you'll swim with your arms and hands. You can use special webbed gloves for more power. When you're ready, your instructor will have you venture into somewhat deeper water. Take your time and equalize your ears and mask gently and often, beginning as soon as you submerge. It may take some practice before you equalize effortlessly, so be patient and take your time. Stay close to your buddy and watch for signals from your instructor. As you already learned, it's important to get into the habit of monitoring your air supply by checking your SPG frequently. You want to establish this habit beginning now in your first confined water dive. Check it frequently and let your instructor know if you get close to the caution zone. Although it shouldn't happen if you monitor your SPG regularly, you'll learn how to respond to an out-of-air emergency, beginning with alternate air source use. First, give your buddy the out-of-air and share air signals. If your buddy has an extra second stage alternate, you'll pull it free from where it's secured on the chest. Place the second stage in your mouth, being sure it's right side up. Clear it like you've already learned, and resume breathing. Next, you and your buddy hold on to each other so you stay close as you ascend. The best way to hang on depends on the type of alternate you're using, but generally, you hold on to your buddy's arm, BCD, or tank valve. If it's an alternate inflator regulator, your buddy will give you the second stage from his mouth and switch to the alternate on the BCD hose. Although it's easy to avoid running out of air, it's a good idea to practice alternate air source use from time to time, just in case. After you've been swimming around a bit, your instructor will give you the up signal. You want to ascend by swimming up slowly, staying close to your buddy. When you reach the surface, keep your mask on and regulator in your mouth, and inflate your BCD until you float comfortably, then swim back to water shallow enough to stand in. During this course, you'll learn several methods for exiting the water, each suited to a different dive environment. At this point, you'll probably exit in shallow water. You and your buddy help each other out of your weights and scuba units and hand them up to someone. Put them on the pool edge or something like that. Take off your fins and exit the water carefully. After your confined water dive, you'll need to disassemble your gear for rinsing and storage. First, close the tank valve until it stops. Next, push the purge button to release all the pressure in the regulator. Disconnect the low-pressure inflator hose and unclip the SPG. Remove the regulator, then dry and replace the dust cap. Wrap and secure the BCD straps so they don't dangle. Release the tank band and lift it off. Lay the tank down so it can't fall while you rinse everything with fresh water. This is important, even after a pool dive, because chlorine can harm your gear as much as salt water can. Okay, that takes care of Section 1. Good job! You're well on your way toward your PADI Open Water Diver certification. Pretty cool, huh?
Fly through the water, under the sea.
Ready to move on? Excellent. Section 2 looks at adapting to the underwater world and some more about underwater respiration. We go over some more dive equipment and cover more detail on the buddy system, communication, and procedures. And then we'll jump into your next underwater adventure with the confined water dive preview. During your first confined water dive, you probably noticed that underwater, light, sound, and heat act differently. You've probably also noticed that things look larger or closer underwater. This is because of refraction, when light changes angle slightly as it goes from water to air, causing about a 33% magnification. Water also absorbs and reflects light, not only making it darker underwater than above, but absorbing color as you go deeper. First you lose red, then orange, yellow, green, and finally blue at the greatest depths. Water also affects sound. You'll hear things, but it's often difficult to tell where they're coming from. This is because sound travels about 4 times faster in water. Obviously, you won't be talking underwater, but you can still use sound to get your buddy's attention. You've probably noticed that you chill faster underwater than in air. Water conducts heat about 20 times faster than air, so comfortable temperatures in air are too cold in water without protection from a wetsuit or dry suit. Left unchecked, heat loss can lead to hypothermia, a serious condition in which your body cools so much it can't function normally. Continuous, uncontrollable shivering is your body's signal that you've lost too much body heat. No matter what kind of exposure protection you're wearing, if you begin to shiver, end the dive immediately and seek warmth. If you've ever tried to run in waist-deep water, you've experienced how its density resists motion. To save energy and avoid getting out of breath while diving, you want to swim slowly and steadily. Avoid rapid, jerky movements, which waste energy and make you use your air faster. Your profile affects this too. You want to be streamlined and horizontal to reduce drag, with your gauges tucked in close and with proper weighting. Dangling gauges add drag, bash and damage themselves, and can destroy aquatic life. Too much weight drags your hips down, disrupting your streamlining because you're not horizontal in the water. Learn to pace yourself, take it easy and relax while diving. Even though you breathe air from your scuba tank, you breathe a little bit differently underwater than at the surface. As you probably know, your body can only use the air that actually reaches your lungs. The air passages to and from your lungs are dead air spaces that play no part in gas exchange. Snorkels and regulators increase this space, so when you inhale, the first air into your lungs is air from your previous exhalation, high in waste carbon dioxide exhaled with your last breath. If you breathe shallowly, you inhale proportionally little fresh air, but if you inhale deeply, you draw in proportionately more. So slow, deep breathing is more efficient and the way to breathe when you're underwater. Another thing you'll notice is that it's harder to breathe dense air underwater. If you overexert yourself, trying to breathe the dense air can make you experience fatigue, labored breathing, a feeling of suffocation, weakness, anxiety, headache, muscle cramping, or a tendency to panic. If this happens, stop everything, breathe deeply, and rest while you catch your breath. If you experience overexertion at the surface, get buoyant by inflating your BCD or dropping your weights. Then rest and catch your breath. Signal for help if you need to. Once you recover, proceed at a slower pace. Prevent overexertion by pacing yourself to avoid breathlessness. Know your physical limits, move slowly, and avoid prolonged exertion. It's not unusual to have a little bit of water in your snorkel or regulator, especially after clearing it. Using airway control, you can breathe past this water by inhaling slowly and cautiously, and by using your tongue as a splash guard to keep water from entering your mouth. After you get a breath, Exhale sharply to clear the remaining water. If you accidentally inhale some water, you may cough and choke a bit. Hold in your regulator or snorkel and cough as you need to. Swallowing may help too. So, in a nutshell, your breathing goals underwater are to always breathe slowly, deeply, and continuously when using scuba. Strive to develop airway control. Okay, let's look at more of the stuff you get to use, including exposure suits, weight systems, dive tools and knives, gear bags, and diving instruments. You'll probably want an exposure suit for virtually every dive to reduce heat loss and to protect you from incidental scrapes or stings. Made of stretch nylon or similar fabrics, bodysuits don't insulate much, but you wear them primarily in warm water for protection. They also help you slide into a wetsuit and provide some extra insulation, so many divers also wear them under their wetsuit. By far the most common exposure suit is the wetsuit. Wetsuits have different styles and thicknesses, making them suitable for a wide temperature range. They insulate you with a layer of neoprene foam. You get wet, but the suit traps the water against your skin. The water quickly warms, and as long as it remains trapped, it doesn't contribute to further heat loss. Dry suits provide the most insulation by keeping you dry. The suit keeps out the water, and you wear an insulating undergarment to retain heat. Because air conducts heat relatively poorly, air plus the undergarment provides the most insulation possible. Diving in a dry suit isn't difficult, but it calls for some special techniques covered in a short course. If you'll be using a dry suit in this course, your instructor will go over these and have you practice using one. You choose your exposure suit based on where you'll be diving, and you may find that you need more than one kind. Your local PADI dive center or resort can help you select the best one for your needs. Just remember that it's not cold water that's no fun, but being cold. With the right suit, you can dive even the coolest water in relative comfort. And also, remember that just because you're protected from the reef doesn't mean the reef's protected from you. Your suit may reduce the risk of getting hurt by aquatic organisms, but you're still responsible for reducing the risk you pose to them. Rinse any exposure suit in fresh water after using it. Dry the inside, then the outside, and store it in a cool, dry place. Lubricate zippers according to manufacturer guidelines. Store wetsuits on large, wide hangers, not thin ones like wire. You typically store dry suits rolled up in their bags. In water colder than about 21 degrees centigrade, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you'll want some exposure protection for your head, hands, and feet with hoods, gloves, and wetsuit boots. And you may want to use some of these all the time for protection. With wetsuits and most dry suits, you use a neoprene wetsuit hood. Bibbed hoods have a broad flange you tuck into the suit. Some dry suits don't have a place to tuck a bib, so you use an unbibbed hood. You wear a hooded vest under a wetsuit to provide extra insulation for your torso. You can also get jackets with attached hoods. In cooler water, wetsuit gloves keep your fingers from becoming numb. In warmer water, you can wear thinner reef gloves for protection with more dexterity. But keep in mind that gloves don't give you a license to touch anything you want with abandon. You can still get cuts or stings through gloves if you're not careful. Many divers wear wetsuit boots even in tropical water because they provide some foot protection as well as warmth. Wet and dry suits are such good insulators that you can overheat on a warm day before you get in the water. To avoid this, set up all your other gear before getting into your exposure suit. Once in it, limit your activity and protect yourself as much as possible from the sun. Keep your hood off or pulled back if you're wearing one. Leave your jacket unzipped as long as possible, and if necessary, cool down by jumping in the water momentarily or getting sprayed down with a hose. Most people float, and with a wetsuit or dry suit, you will float. Your weight system just offsets this positive buoyancy and allows you to sink. When you're properly weighted, you sink slowly, not like a rock. The most common weight systems are weight belts and BCD integrated weight systems. With either type, the most important feature is a quick release system that allows you to dump your weight one-handed in an emergency. So it's important that you wear your weight system so nothing interferes with ditching your weights if you need to regain positive buoyancy in an emergency. Whether you choose a weight belt or an integrated system depends on your preferences and how much weight you need. You'll learn to set how much weight you use a little later in this section. Most weight systems require minimal maintenance. A brief rinse usually does it. Handle them carefully though. Dropping weight can break gear or toes. Scuba units with weight systems don't usually stand well, so lay them over so they don't fall. Let's go over the options you have in alternate air sources. Hopefully, you won't ever need it, but just in case, you should always have one. An alternate air source is any second stage you may use other than your own primary second stage to ascend while breathing normally. Most alternates require your buddy's help. The extra second stage, sometimes called an octopus, typically has an extra long hose to make it easier to use. An alternate inflator regulator combines the low pressure inflator with a second stage, so you find it on the BCD hose. With this alternate, your buddy gives you the primary second stage and switches to the alternate inflator regulator. From the first confined water dive, you're already familiar with the low pressure inflator. The inflator comes standard with your BCD unless you opt for an alternate inflator regulator which your dive center or resort installs for you. When you invest in your BCD, your dive center or resort will connect the inflator hose to your regulator first stage. Be sure to rinse the low pressure inflator thoroughly after each use, along with the rest of your BCD. You carry a dive knife or dive tool, so you've got a practical tool at hand in case you need it for an emergency as well as for convenience. Take care of your knife by rinsing it in fresh water after each use and by carefully sharpening and cleaning it as needed according to manufacturer instruction. It's important to invest in a quality gear bag. Choose one made from heavy-duty fabric that will hold all your gear except your tank, weights, and dry suit if you have one. Get one a bit bigger than you need now so you can add to your kit and still have room. You can get many styles and features in gear bags depending on what you like. Your bag doesn't require much preparation or care. Pack it in reverse order from which you need your gear so that what you need is on top. This way, you don't have to pull everything out to suit up. When you wash your gear after diving, rinse the salt out of your bag and let it dry before storing it. Since you're not a fish and lack most fish instincts, you use instruments to give you information underwater. As you learn, there are limits to how long you can stay underwater depending on previous dives and how deep you go. To track time, you either need a dive watch or a bottom timer. Underwater watches may be analog or digital. Most manufacturers rate their scuba diving watches for 200 meters or deeper, more or less. No, you won't be going that deep, but these are the ones designed with scuba in mind. A bottom timer does the same job, but it's pressure activated, so you don't have to remember to set or start it. Depth gauges tell how deep you are. It's mandatory equipment, no surprise there. Although there are analog models, the digital versions combined with your bottom timer are the most popular. It's amazing how the underwater world can throw off your sense of direction. You use a compass to track where you are so you can follow a specific course, find your way back to the exit, and so on. An underwater compass is liquid-filled and pressure-resistant and has reference marks called the lubber line and index markers that you align to swim along a given heading. You'll learn how to use your compass a bit later. You learned about SPGs in Section 1. It's mandatory equipment, pretty obvious, and often combined with other gauges. For one, it may be part of an instrument console, which packages several gauges together. Consoles put all your information in one place, but they're bulkier and more likely to drag and damage aquatic life if you're not careful. So many divers prefer wrist mounting their gauges. This adds a step when kitting up, but it's more streamlined because gauges on your wrist don't dangle. The ultimate dive instrument is the dive computer, which combines your bottom timer, depth gauge, and sometimes your SPG into an instrument that calculates your allowable remaining underwater time. They're quickly becoming standard equipment, and you'll learn more about using them in Section 5. Your PADI dive center or resort can help you choose a computer or other instruments that suit the kind of diving you'll be doing. Your primary maintenance for all instruments is, you guessed it, washing them thoroughly in fresh water after each use. But also, treat them carefully. They're precision instruments, so avoid banging or dropping them and avoid prolonged sun exposure. In Section 1, we looked at the buddy system. Now let's look at communication and procedures you use to make the buddy system effective. Sound carries well underwater, but without special electronic equipment, talking underwater is nearly useless. So you communicate with your hands, by signaling or writing. First, get your buddy's attention. Now you can pass a message on a slate, but for routine communication, it's fastest to use signals. There are 25 standard signals. They're pretty intuitive, and you'll probably make up more with your buddy to suit the occasion. Sometimes you need to communicate with someone on a boat or ashore from the surface. As you just saw, waving means help, so don't greet someone that way. To get attention, carry a whistle on your BCD inflator, where you can reach it without having to dig in a pocket. When you're in rougher water in particular, an inflatable signal tube makes it easier for the boat to spot you amid the waves. When diving with your buddy, you want to plan your dive together. There are 9 points to discuss and agree on. First, agree on appropriate entry and exit points and techniques. Then, agree on the course to follow, along with depth and time limits. You should establish and review communications and decide on a returning air pressure. Discuss how you'll stay together and also what to do if you're separated. Go over emergency procedures and agree on your dive objective. Plan your dive together and then dive your plan together. Before each dive, run through each other's equipment using the pre-dive safety check. Use the phrase, begin with, review, and friend to help you remember the checks. Start with begin, B, BCD. Check operation, adjustment, and that the inflator's hooked up. If appropriate, be sure it's partially inflated for the entry. Width, W, weights. Check for proper weighting and that the quick release system is free and clear for ditching with a right-hand release. Review, R, releases. Make sure you and your buddy are familiar with each other's releases and that they're secure. And, A, air. Confirm that you have enough air for the dive, that your valves are open, and that you know where to find and how to use each other's alternate air sources. Friend, F, final OK. Give each other a final inspection, looking for unsecured gauges, missing or out-of-place gear, and so on. Make a habit of performing this check. It goes pretty quick once you know it. During the dive, stay close to your buddy. It's easiest if you agree on who will lead, where you're going, and what to do if you get separated. The rule of thumb is to look for each other for no more than a minute and then reunite on the surface. But you may modify this if conditions, such as current, warrant. Anyway, the point is it's your responsibility to stay with your buddy and follow the rules, guidelines, and recommendations for each other's safety. No one can do it for you. Time to head to the water. Let's go over what you'll be learning and practicing during your second pool or confined water dive. If your instructor had your gear set up for you during your last session, you'll probably set it up for this one. Then gear up like you learned last time. Starting with this confined water dive, you and your buddy will begin practicing the pre-dive safety check. Remember, BWRAF, BCD, weights, releases, air, and final OK. You'll learn several water entries during this course, and the one to use in any situation is usually the easiest. If you can wade or lower yourself in, that's usually better than a long drop. You obviously don't attempt entries from excessive heights. One entry you may practice is the giant stride. After kitting up and the pre-dive safety check, check that the entry area is clear. Inflate your BCD about halfway so you'll be buoyant while you wait for your buddy to enter. Check that your buddy's ready, breathe from your regulator, and hold your mask so the water doesn't dislodge it when you hit the water. Then, step out as though walking. After entering, signal you're okay and clear the area while you wait for your buddy. You may also practice the controlled seated entry, which is useful from a low, stable platform like a dock, swim step, or poolside. After checking the area, Making sure your buddy's ready and partially inflating your BCD, reach across yourself like this. Pivot on your hands and ease into the water. Easy. During this confined water dive, you'll start using your snorkel to save tank air when you're on the surface. If you've never used a snorkel, it's pretty simple. Put it in your mouth, exhale to blow out any water, and then breathe. To clear water from your snorkel, simply exhale sharply and forcefully through it to blow out the water, like shooting a giant pea shooter. Clear any water that sloshes in while you're using it in the same way. Take your first breath cautiously after clearing it, just in case there's a bit of water left. You can breathe past the water by inhaling slowly and letting air bubble through until you've got enough air to blow out the remaining water. Commonly, you'll snorkel on the surface to save tank air until you reach your dive site, then switch to the regulator and descend. At the end of the dive, you'll switch back to snorkel and swim back to the boat or shore. So, your instructor will have you practice switching back and forth between your regulator and snorkel with your face in the water. It's simply a matter of taking a breath, switching, and then exhaling sharply to clear the snorkel or regulator, like this. Practice until you can do it effortlessly. Your instructor will also have you practice swimming at the surface while snorkeling. Keep your arms at your side, look ahead so you don't hit anything, and keep your feet underwater. You may find it more relaxing to swim on your back. When you reach the place where you want to dive, you and your buddy go through 5 steps for starting your descent, which you'll begin practicing during this confined water dive. First, signal that you're ready to go down. Next, orient to something at the surface so you'll know where you are when you come back up. Third, set your watch bezel or start your stopwatch function if necessary. And then fourth, switch to your regulator. Finally, slowly deflate your BCD and exhale to start down. Equalize immediately upon submerging and do so frequently as you descend. Stay relatively head up, which makes it easier to equalize, and so you can kick to slow your descent if you need to. It doesn't happen often, but you can lose your mask underwater. Just in case, you'll want to practice breathing without a mask while keeping water out of your nose. It sounds harder than it is. You might find it easiest to inhale through your mouth and exhale through your nose to start, but practice until you can breathe just through your mouth. If you need to look up, exhale through your nose as you do to keep water out. Your instructor will have you breathe without your mask for at least a minute, which will be long enough to reach the surface on a typical dive. Of course, usually, if you lose your mask, you or your buddy will find it. Put it back on like this, making sure to keep hair or the edge of your hood out from the edge so it seals okay. Clear the mask and replace the strap, or replace the strap and then clear it. Whatever works best for you. If your BCD or dry suit inflator were to stick open, it would inflate your BCD or suit, possibly leading to a runaway ascent. To stop this, simply disconnect the low-pressure hose. To simulate a sticking inflator, your instructor may have you hold down the inflation button with one hand while you disconnect the hose. If you had to disconnect your inflator hose, or if you had no air in your cylinder, you'd have to inflate your BCD orally. During this confined water dive, you'll practice doing this at the surface, like you would to stay afloat. Simply take a breath and blow into the BCD hose mouthpiece while opening the same button you use to deflate. Blow in about 2/3 of your breath and release the valve button. Repeat this until you float comfortably, and note that you can save energy by letting your face go under while you blow into the BCD, and then lift your face for the next breath. This is easier than fighting to keep your face out the whole time. During this dive, you'll get to set your weight so you don't use too much or too little. Here's what you do. First, get in the water with all your gear on and your best guess as to how much weight you need. Second, with your regulator in your mouth, deflate your BCD and hold a normal breath at the surface. Third, relax and see where you float. If you're weighted properly, you'll float at about eye level. Add or subtract weight until you do. And then fourth, exhale. You should begin to descend slowly. Finally, if you do this with a full cylinder, add about 2 kilos or 5 pounds to compensate for the weight of the air you use during the dive. If you watch your SPG closely, you should never find yourself running out of air. But you should know what it feels like just in case, so you have as much warning as possible. To simulate low air, your instructor closes your tank valve while you breathe from your regulator. When breathing gets difficult, signal out of air and your instructor will reopen it. Resume breathing. That's all there is to it, but it gives you a good idea of what it feels like if you accidentally breathe your tank empty. You started learning ascent basics in your first confined water dive, so let's build on that. A proper ascent has 5 steps you'll begin practicing during this dive. First, you and your buddy signal and agree to ascend. Second, you note the time you've been underwater. Third, you reach up with your right hand as a guard and hold up your BCD hose with your left to release expanding air as you come up. Fourth, look up and around as you come up, slowly rotating if you need to make sure everything's clear above. Fifth, you ascend no faster than 18 meters, 60 feet per minute while breathing normally. When you reach the surface, inflate your BCD so you float before you remove the regulator from your mouth. In an emergency at the surface, your first reaction should be to get buoyant. If you can't do this with your BCD, you drop your weight. During this confined water dive, your instructor will have you practice doing this. If you're using a weight belt, reach down with your right hand, release the buckle, and pull it clear. Make sure there's no one below before you drop it. If you're using a weight system, you'll use the system's quick release. For simplicity or to avoid pool damage, your instructor may have you remove most of the weights before you practice this. Sometimes you'll need to slip out of your scuba gear to exit the water, like when you're diving from a small boat with no ladder. First, remove your weight system and hand it up or lay it on the pool side. If you have a weight-integrated BCD, it's usually fine to leave them in it. Next, slide out of your scuba system and be sure it has enough air to float before you let go. Remove your fins last if you need to, but you may find it best to wear them so you can kick as you lift yourself out of the water, like this. Okay, that's it for section 2. Won't be too long before you're doing this in open water.
Okay, 2 down. After you finish section 3, you're more than halfway to PADI open water diver and almost all the way to PADI scuba diver. During this section, we'll look at some things you'll need to know about the dive environment, plus go over some more detail about dive planning. We'll look at boat diving, one of the most fun ways to get out on the water. And you'll learn basic emergency handling in the problem management discussion. Then it's off to look at your next underwater adventure in the confined water dive preview for your third confined water dive. So let's go. You've probably noticed that the underwater world has variables that affect it: temperature, visibility, bottom composition, aquatic life, and sunlight. You already know that you need to consider water temperature. How much insulation you need varies with how cold it is. But what's not so obvious is that temperature changes with depth, generally getting colder as you go deeper. Different temperatures tend to form distinct layers, so in calm water you drop abruptly from warmer into cooler water. This is called a thermocline, and the difference above and below it can be as much as 8 to 11 degrees Celsius, 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So for adequate protection, choose your exposure suit based on the temperature at your dive depth. Visibility affects the diving so much, it's often the first thing you want to know about the dive site. Lots of variables affect visibility: water movement, weather, how easily you stir up the bottom, and so on. Limited viz makes it more difficult to keep track of your location and your buddy. You handle this by using your compass and other clues to navigate, and by staying closer to your buddy than you otherwise might. If it's real lousy, it may be better to pull the plug and do something else. Diving's supposed to be fun. Clear water can disorient you too. The bottom might seem closer than it is, so check your computer or depth gauge frequently to avoid exceeding your planned depth. Earlier, you learned to dive relaxed and avoid overexertion. That's why you need to account for currents when you go diving. A current is water movement, usually caused by the wind, heat, tides, or waves. Trying to swim against a current, even a mild one, can quickly tire and exhaust you. You suck up your air faster, too. You need to use the right techniques and avoid all but the mildest currents. When there's a mild current, you generally begin your dive swimming against the current. That way you don't have to fight it to get back to the boat or your exit point. If you accidentally end up down current from your exit, don't try to swim against it. Swim perpendicular to the current to reach the boat's trail line or to reach shore. Swimming against the current will quickly exhaust you. Try to avoid long swims against a current, especially on the surface. If you must swim against very light current a short distance, do it on the bottom if you can, where the current's usually much weaker. If you get caught in a current when boat diving and can't make the boat, don't fight it. Fill your BCD or drop your weights if necessary. Rest and relax. Stay calm, signal the boat, and wait for it to pick you up. Diving in strong currents requires special training and experience beyond what you'll have as a beginner. Most of the good stuff is on the bottom, so that's where you spend most of a dive. The bottom composition affects the techniques you use. Some bottoms, like silt, mud, and sand, stir up easily. You don't want to do that, so stay above the bottom and use care exiting and entering the water. Regardless of bottom type, stay neutrally buoyant and well above the bottom so you don't stir it up, and so you don't harm any delicate underwater organisms. You'll learn to recognize unsensitive bottoms that you can settle on without significant risk to you or the environment, but it's best to avoid direct bottom contact as much as possible. Another fragile diving environment you may encounter underwater is a shipwreck or other submerged cultural site. Divers share a special privilege of having access to some of the world's underwater sites that may be part of our cultural heritage or maritime history. In order to preserve these sites for future generations, it's important to fine-tune your buoyancy and streamline your equipment to avoid disturbing or damaging the site during your dive. Resist the urge to remove articles from these sites and be certain to obey all local laws and regulations. And avoid tying to or anchoring on sites in a manner that may cause a disturbance or possible damage. Overall, respect our wrecks and the cultural heritage that lies beneath the surface of the water. As a diver, you'll interact actively or passively with the aquatic life. Active implies physical contact, which, more often than not, is associated with harming organisms, like bumping coral or hunting for fish. Passive interaction, on the other hand, involves leaving organisms relatively undisturbed, like taking pictures or just watching. As you might imagine, responsible divers engage primarily in passive interaction with aquatic life. The typical aquatic animal's response to an approaching diver is to flee. The vast majority are timid and harmless. If you spot a potentially aggressive animal, remain still and calm on the bottom. Watch it, but don't swim toward it because that could trigger defensive behavior. Chances are it's just passing through. Enjoy the view because you don't get to see these creatures often. If it hangs around, calmly swim away along the bottom, keeping an eye on it, and exit the water. Nine simple precautions will help you avoid problems with aquatic animals. First, treat all of them with respect. Don't tease them or intentionally disturb them. Second, be especially careful where you put your hands and feet in murky water. Third, shiny jewelry can resemble bait fish or small prey, so it's best to dive without it. Fourth, if you spearfish, remove fish from the water immediately to avoid attracting predators. Fifth, wear gloves and exposure suits to avoid stings and cuts, but remember that some stingers and spines will go right through them, so stay cautious. Sixth, swim neutrally buoyant well above the bottom. Seventh, move slowly and carefully. And eighth, watch where you put your limbs. Finally, ninth, don't touch unfamiliar animals. If you don't know what it is, don't touch it. A good rule of thumb is that if it's very ugly, very pretty, or doesn't flee from you, don't touch it. The first thing you'll notice about aquatic plants is that they're easier to sneak up on than many aquatic animals. Aquatic plants range from giant kelp forests to grasses and algae in freshwater lakes and rivers. There's a small possibility of entanglement in some of these, but keep streamlined, watch where you go, and avoid dense growth areas, and this won't be much problem. If you do get snagged, it's usually no big deal. Stop and back up slightly. Don't turn around because it just wraps the vegetation around you. It's usually only a strand or two hanging you up, which you and your buddy can clear easily. If you're caught in more than a few strands, try breaking the strands by bending and snapping it. This is often more effective than trying to cut free with your knife. One thing about diving is that it gets you out in the sun a bunch. And that causes the most common diving injury, sunburn. It can really make you miserable, so be prudent. Wear sunscreen and protective clothing. Stay in the shade as much as possible, and don't forget your sunglasses. Freshwater sites include lakes, quarries, springs, and rivers. They're great for photography, exploration, and wreck diving. Freshwater diving considerations include currents, easily disturbed bottom composition, limited viz, cold water, and abrupt thermoclines in boat traffic. All of which are saltwater considerations too, of course. Freshwater diving can include diving at sites higher than 300 meters, 1,000 feet above sea level. This requires special training and techniques to account for the altitude. Freshwater doesn't make you as buoyant as saltwater, so you don't need as much weight as when you wear the same gear and exposure suit in saltwater. Most recreational diving takes place in temperate and tropical saltwater. Saltwater considerations include waves, surf, tides, current, coral, boats, deep water, marine life, and remote locations. Any place you go has unique aspects and considerations, so again, check out a local orientation to a new area. The ocean is a dynamic environment. It can be tranquil and calm, or angry and powerful. This directly influences diving, so your instructor will cover what you need to know for your open water dives. Be sure to get a local orientation whenever you are diving in new conditions. Dive planning avoids disappointments due to misunderstandings, forgotten gear, poor conditions, and so on. It's really planning your fun. Think of it in 4 steps: advanced planning, preparation, last-minute preparation, and pre-dive planning. Advanced planning begins when you decide to go diving. At this stage, you generally call a buddy. Decide on an objective, what you're going to do. Pick a dive site and decide on logistics, such as where and when to meet. Consult your logbook if you need to, and plan an alternate site in case you can't dive at your first choice. It's a good idea to prepare at least a day or 2 ahead of the dive and visit your local dive center or resort. Check the weather and dive report. Get your tank filled. And use a checklist as you go through your gear, inspecting everything. This gives you time to correct any problems you find. Just before you leave, check the weather and let someone know where you're going, when to expect you back, and what to do if you're not. Grab last-minute stuff like your jacket, sunglasses, ice chest, and so on. Pack your dive bag, if you haven't already, with what you need first in last if you're boat diving. Finally, do an idiot check so you don't accidentally forget something. Right before the dive, plan the details. Check the conditions and decide whether to dive or head to your alternate site. Agree on where you'll enter, exit, and the course you'll follow. Review hand signals and communications. Decide what to do if you become separated, what your air, depth, and time limits will be, and what to do in an emergency.
If I have a problem with my ears, I'm going to tell you my ears are not okay.
No fish?
If you're a PADI scuba diver, you'll make the pre-dive plan with a PADI instructor, assistant instructor, or dive master who's leading your dive. Now do it. You have fewer problems and more fun when you plan your dive and use the plan. Plans don't have to be complicated, nor take a lot of work. They can be simple, take only a couple of minutes to discuss, and offer flexibility, but you should follow them. No one can plan a dive and follow that plan for you. You and your buddy have to do it. Although there's a lot of good diving from shore, if you're a diver, you're going to spend time on boats. They take you to sites you can't reach from shore. They eliminate long surface swims, and best of all, boating is fun. If you'll be boat diving in this course, your instructor will cover what you need to know for your open water dives. And as mentioned earlier, be sure to get a local orientation whenever you are boat diving in new conditions. Diving has an impressive safety record that's better than many other sports and adventure activities. But common sense tells you that going in water and under it presents risks and hazards. The PADI open water diver and scuba diver courses teach you to minimize these. But if a problem does arise, you'll want to be able to care for yourself or another diver. We'll look at recognizing when a diver needs assistance, how to provide aid at the surface, and handling underwater problems. But if you'll be diving where you don't have secondary assistance, a dive master, instructor, lifeguard, or paramedic immediately available, you should have additional training in first aid, CPR, and diver rescue. The PADI Medic First Aid course and the PADI Rescue Diver courses provide these, expanding and refining your problem prevention and management skills. You'll probably find these among the most challenging and rewarding courses you complete as a diver. For now, focus on problem prevention and be prepared with emergency contact information such as local paramedics and police, radio frequencies for the Coast Guard, and contact information for the local diving emergency service, such as the Divers Alert Network. If there's no service where you're diving, then have contact information for the nearest recompression chamber. In any case, carry a mobile telephone, radio, change for a payphone, or some other way to contact help. Your instructor will provide information for your area. Although you scuba dive underwater, most problems occur at the surface. You prevent and control most problems simply by staying within your limitations, by relaxing, and by establishing and maintaining ample buoyancy at the surface. The first thing to do if you have a problem at the surface is to get buoyant if you're not already. Let your equipment work for you. Don't waste energy and exhaust yourself trying to stay up. Drop your weights. That's why they have a quick release. You can usually recover them later, and if not, they're easy to replace. If you need help, do the smart thing and ask. Whistle, wave, or yell, and get aid before a small problem becomes big. It makes things easier on you and other divers. It's often obvious when a diver has a problem, but often not. And you need to know the difference between a diver with a problem in control and one out of control, so you respond appropriately. Divers with a problem and in control normally appear relaxed. They generally signal for help if needed, keep their equipment on, move deliberately, and respond to instructions. Divers who panic have lost self-control and succumb to sudden, unreasoned fear. Instinctive, inappropriate behavior replaces trained, reasoned behavior. They typically fail to inflate their BCDs or drop their weights. They spit out their regulators and push their masks up or off. Fearing drowning, they expend tremendous energy keeping their head out of the water. Their eyes are wide and unseeing, and they don't usually respond to directions. Panic divers need immediate help because they will struggle until exhausted and unable to stay up. Assisting another diver has 4 steps. First, establish buoyancy for yourself and the diver. Second, calm the diver. Third, help the diver reestablish breathing control. And fourth, assist the diver out of the water. You reduce risk by assuring you won't sink. If you're in the water with the diver, inflate your BCD and ideally extend something that floats to the diver. If you're out of the water, stay there. Extend or throw flotation to the diver. If you don't have anything to give the diver, inflate his BCD or drop his weights, or both. Once buoyant, the diver will probably relax a bit. Talk to him and encourage him to breathe slowly and deeply. Then, if necessary, assist him out of the water. You'll practice towing another diver in your 3rd confined water dive. You prevent most underwater problems by relaxing while you dive, keeping a close eye on your SPG and staying within your limits. The most likely underwater problems are overexertion, running low on or out of air, a free-flowing regulator, and entanglement. In Section 2, you learned how to prevent and handle overexertion. Overexertion makes you feel air-starved. As you learned, keep a slow, relaxed pace. If you or your buddy start to get out of breath, stop, rest, and catch your breath before moving on at a slower pace. You easily prevent running low on or out of air by watching your SPG. Sudden air loss due to a malfunction is almost unheard of. But suppose it happens. It's not a serious situation if you consider your options and take action. If you start up when your regulator begins breathing hard, you may be able to ascend normally, breathing lightly but continuously, because as water pressure decreases, you can use more of your tank air. Ascending with an alternate air source, like you've practiced, is your best all-round option. But you have to know where to find and how to use your buddy's alternate, so be sure to review that during the pre-dive safety check. Even if you're not as close to your buddy as you should be, you can still reach the surface safely using a controlled emergency swimming ascent if you're no deeper than, say, 10 to 12 meters, 30 to 40 feet. Simply look up, reach up, and swim up, keeping all your gear in place and making an ah sound so you exhale all the way to the surface to prevent lung overexpansion injury. If you're too deep for a controlled emergency ascent and too far from your buddy to use his alternate, make a buoyant emergency ascent. Drop your weights, then ascend looking and reaching up while making an ah sound all the way to the surface. You'll exceed a safe ascent rate, so use this as a last resort if it's the only way to reach the surface. When you reach the surface following a low air or out of air emergency, you'll need to inflate your BCD orally or drop your weights to establish buoyancy. Today's regulators are very reliable and designed for fail-safe malfunctions that usually provide continuous air, free flow, rather than cut off your air. You can breathe from a free-flowing regulator, and you'll learn how in your next confined water dive. Entanglement is rare, but possible in aquatic plants, fishing line, tree branches, and the like. Avoid it by watching where you go, moving slowly, and keeping your equipment secured. But if you get hung up on something, stop, think, and then free yourself calmly. Get your buddy to help. If you're low on air or severely entangled, you may need to cut yourself free. If so, be careful about what you cut. Don't complicate the situation by cutting your gear, yourself, or the wrong thing. With tough rope or cable, cutting may be slower than disentangling. Do what's fastest. Swallowing water, extreme fatigue, entanglement, lung overexpansion, and other incidents can cause near drowning, becoming unresponsive and stopping breathing underwater. Near drowning requires an immediate response. The primary concern is to check for breathing and begin rescue breaths if the diver isn't breathing. If the diver has no pulse, you need to get the diver out of the water to perform CPR. Here are 4 general procedures if a diver appears to lose consciousness and become unresponsive underwater. First, bring the diver to the surface and check for breathing. Second, establish ample buoyancy for you and the victim. In some situations, you might do this and then check for breathing. Third, call for assistance as needed and available. Finally, help get the diver out of the water. Follow these procedures once you get the diver out of the water. They also apply to a diver who becomes unresponsive or experiences lung overexpansion injury symptoms after a dive, such as difficulty breathing, confusion, lowered alertness, unclear thinking, paralysis, visual problems, or chest pain. Keep the diver's airway open and check for breathing and pulse continuously. Provide rescue breathing and CPR as needed. If the diver has a pulse and is breathing, keep him lying on his left side in the recovery position if doing so doesn't interfere with any aid you're providing. If the diver's responsive, lying supine is fine. Administer emergency oxygen and keep the diver still. Maintain normal body temperature by protecting her from heat or cold as necessary. Get emergency medical assistance. And if someone cannot go with the diver to medical treatment, write down as much background information as possible and send it with the diver. Time to dive again. Let's look at the fun you'll have in Confined Water Dive 3. By now you're aware that you use neutral buoyancy to dive relaxed, maneuver easily, ascend under control, and so on. During this dive you'll practice the fin pivot, which develops your ability to fine-tune your buoyancy. And you'll do this by inflating your BCD orally as well as with your low-pressure inflator. You might do this after disconnecting a leaking inflator. Take a breath, switch to the BCD hose and blow about 2/3 of your breath into it. Save enough to clear the regulator, and remember, blow bubbles when the regulator's out of your mouth. You might need to do this a few times. To fin pivot, lie face down, breathing slowly and deeply. Add air in short bursts to your BCD, or one breath at a time if you're inflating orally. Then inhale to see if you rise off the bottom. Gradually add air until you pivot up when you inhale and down when you exhale. This means you're neutrally buoyant. Some divers need to pivot on their knees or other body point, which is okay, but fin tips are best. By the way, if you're using a dry suit, your instructor will have you adjust it, not your BCD, to set your buoyancy. Once you're neutral, you'll notice your buoyancy changes with depth changes because the air in your BCD or dry suit expands or compresses. To maintain neutral buoyancy, add air as you go deeper and release air as you ascend. During your open water dives, to prevent an uncontrolled ascent, you release air from your BCD frequently as you go up. After you're neutral, your instructor will let you practice swimming around, adjusting your buoyancy. Pretend you're swimming over sensitive reef and try to keep from touching the bottom. This gets you ready for diving on a real reef. A cramp is a painful, involuntary muscle contraction. This can happen due to dehydration, cold, restricted circulation, wrong fin size, and working a muscle beyond its fitness level. It hurts, but it's easy to handle. Stop and rest the cramped muscle, gently stretching and massaging it. You can stretch out a leg cramp by pulling your fin tip, or by having your buddy brace your foot to push against. After relieving it, rest a few moments before resuming at a reduced pace. Sometimes a buddy's too tired or has severe cramps and can't swim effectively. Help out by getting both of you positively buoyant, then using the tired diver push, sometimes called the modified tired swimmer carry, which is simply a way to give the diver a push. Or you can assist by pulling with the tank valve toe. You'll practice both. You already know how to use an alternate air source and what it feels like to run out of air. Now you'll put these together. Your instructor will turn off your air just like before. When you feel it's hard to breathe, signal and secure your buddy's alternate. Your instructor will have you swim with your buddy using the alternate for at least a minute. When you switch back to your regulator, check your SPG to be sure your air's back on. Remember that a regulator malfunction is most likely to make it free flow. Now you'll practice breathing from a free-flowing regulator. You'll hold the purge button in to simulate the malfunction. Hold the mouthpiece near your mouth, but do not insert it fully. Let the excess escape while you sip the air you need. The flow may jostle and flood your mask a bit, but no worries. After you're done, which will be at least 30 seconds, check your SPG. You may be astonished just how much air you burn that quick. Recall that one option in a low or out-of-air emergency as deep as about 10 to 12 meters, 30 to 40 feet, is a controlled emergency swimming ascent. You'll practice this during this confined water dive, but since you won't be as deep as that, you'll practice horizontally. In open water, you'd reach up and look up. So for horizontal practice, you'll look and reach ahead. Then, keeping all your gear in place, you swim while exhaling continuously with an ah sound, so you don't hold your breath and risk lung overexpansion injury. For horizontal practice, you'll swim about 9 meters, 30 feet. After you get it down horizontally, your instructor may have you practice diagonally from the deeper to shallower water. And you'll find that when you do this for real during your open water dives, it's easier than going horizontally. Time to get into the real cool stuff, your open water dives. The first thing you do at a dive site is check out the conditions. Your instructor will show you how to account for weather, water temperature, bottom composition, waves, local area hazards, and so on. You'll also plan your entries and exits. Decide whether you can make the dive safely. This is your responsibility. If not, check your alternate site. You dive for adventure, fun, and a challenge, not to face unreasonable risk. Poor timing and sequence when you kit up can get you tired and overheated, like if you get in your exposure suit too soon or gear up way ahead of your buddy. Gear up at about the same pace as your buddy so you're ready to hit the water together. First, assemble your scuba unit and prep anything else that you can, like defogging your mask, before putting on a heavy exposure suit. Then put on your exposure suit and weights. When you're ready for your scuba unit, have your buddy help if necessary. Next, put on any wrist mount gauges, then go through the pre-dive safety check. Finally, don your mask, snorkel, and gloves. Put your fins on just before entering the water if you're boat diving, or in waist-deep water when you're shore diving. Suiting up takes some forethought at first, but it becomes second nature after a couple of dives. The best technique for getting in the water depends on where you're diving. If you're not sure the best entry for where you are, get an orientation so you can enter and exit safely. For shore diving, the general recommendations are to begin with all your gear on, except perhaps your fins. Depending on the environment, you may put them on first, or put them on in water waist to chest deep. As a general rule, use your regulator until you're floating in deeper water, so if you stumble, you can breathe even with your face under. In deeper water, fill your BCD and switch to snorkel to save air. If you're walking with fins on, walk backward or sideways and shuffle your feet. This helps avoid holes and obstructions and scares off animals that could sting if you step on them. As soon as the water's deep enough, swim out on the surface. Swimming's usually easier than wading. Surf entries and exits require special training, but it's possible you'll enter and exit through mild surf during your open water dives. Your instructor will cover surf entries and exits specific to your dive site. You'll find open water surface swimming a bit different from your confined water dives because you'll cover longer distances and may have currents and waves. Fill your BCD no more than about halfway to minimize drag and pace yourself. Surface swimming's more tiring than underwater swimming. Use your snorkel and breathe cautiously so you don't choke on waves splashing into it. Remember to keep your feet underwater, and you might prefer swimming on your back. Check your location, direction, and buddy frequently. There are a few differences between open water descents and the ones you've practiced in confined water, but one is you're going down farther. If you're weighted properly, emptying your BCD and exhaling should start you down. Remember to equalize early, often, and without forcefulness before you feel discomfort. Keep your head above your feet so you stay oriented. Your descent rate speeds up as water pressure compresses your exposure suit, so put air in your BCD as you go to reach the bottom neutrally buoyant. You may use a line for the first couple of dives. If it's an anchor line, avoid getting jerked up and down by letting your arm swing up and down with the line as the boat rises and falls on the waves. Ready? You're ready to hit Confined Water Dive 3, and you'll be in open water real soon.